You know, I'm right. The podcast that uncovers the origin stories of some of the biggest names in sports, media, entertainment, entrepreneurship, and so much more. Nick Durst here, along with the one and only Joe Calabrese. And Joe, our guest today, very excited about him. We share a lot of the same sports teams that we like. He's a New Yorker just like us, and he's got a lot to say, that's for sure.
Absolutely. You may have seen him on Turner, Sirius, MSG, and MLB.com in the past. Currently, he hosts Unfiltered on the Bleav network, and we're very, very happy to have him on. We welcome Casey Stern to the show. Casey, how you doing, pal?
I'm doing well, boys. Appreciate you. How are you?
Good. We're doing well. We're happy to have you here. And there's always just so much going on in the world, especially in sports. So I'm curious, when you wake up in the morning, what's the first app you're checking?
Usually Twitter. Yeah, usually. I normally it's while I'm getting my kids ready for school, and
Mhm.
then kind of waiting in the line at their school before the doors open and they let them in. So a little bit of Twitter, ESPN.com, if I'm being fair. I usually just kind of generically to bump up to the headlines to see if there's something that I missed when
Mhm.
I went to bed. Those are usually like the first two spots that I go. I have other social media. I use Instagram more for scrolling other people's than using it my own. Facebook, kind of friends and family, those sorts of things. So I kind of use that, more for that aspect, show pictures of the kids and things of that nature. But Twitter is usually, or X, if you will, usually the first place that I go because I know that if something big happened, I won't have to scroll for more than, 10, 12 seconds
Right.
before everybody
Yeah.
that I'm following already is talking.
How about that, Joe? Once again, the
Yeah.
most popular answer
Is
comes
that
back.
is that the most popular answer?
I
Yeah.
think it's the only answer. I
Everyone
mean,
says, but most people, you didn't preface, most people preface it like, oh, it's not the same like it used to be, but they go on. But I think you're right, exactly what
Yeah.
you said. You got everything's there.
right. It's the most
Yeah.
important aggregate of information that we have available to us, especially people who focus on sports and media. Now, as Nick mentioned, you're from New York. We're from Staten Island. You're from Long Island. You're from Massapequa. However, you moved to the South a couple of years ago. So my question to you is, before we get into a little more of your growing up on Long Island, do you miss being home? What is it like, the differences being, in the South as opposed to here? And being a New York a Mets fan, right? Living in the South, living in Atlanta, do people come up to you and kind of heckle you and kind of question your fandom? Because I'm a Yankees fan, so I wouldn't know, right? Nick's a Mets fan. He would know better than I, so how is that like?
Yankee fans, my whole family are Yankee fans except for me. You guys get heckled everywhere, or you're wearing your hats. Most people who wear the hats don't even know anything about the Yankees. I see that all the time down here. Everywhere you go, it's like it's not just Disneyland people where you go and you see everybody in a Yankee hat. It's like really why? Because Jay-Z wears it. I mean, I can't.
Disgusting.
Nick and I understand. It doesn't
Ugh.
make any sense,
Made the
but
Yankees cap more famous than the Yankee
yeah.
team.
I mean, it doesn't really. At least not a Cowboys hat. But that's a different story. Yeah, it's funny because, and I've been, doing some moonlighting on 680, which is the Braves flagship down here, and it's weird. You kind of come in with a different lens. I think it's kind of good in some ways because, I dealt with all the years of the Braves winning or nearly winning from a different vantage point. I mean, I lost the television, and broke it when Kenny Rogers walked Andrew
Ugh.
Jones in 1999. So, I was on the other side of a lot of those things. It's a little kind of bit bizarre. And the South, look, it's definitely different. I've been here since 2015. I went to school in Boston at BU. I lived in LA for 3 years, and I've traveled a lot for work. But living here, I miss home desperately all the time. Yeah, I miss the pizza. I miss the bagels. I miss I miss the people. And I would say, it's kind of generalizing, and I'm not trying to, knock on Atlanta or anywhere else. The most genuine people being around this country and traveling a lot the last 20 years, most genuine people by a large amount, in my estimation, in this country come from where we come from. And I'd say the Northeast in general, because as much as we hate Philly fans and Boston fans in different ways, I kind of think we're all the same. We kind of hate them because they're just like us. They just root for different teams. But I think to me, there's a different kind of lifeblood of humans in the Northeast, especially in the sports fan variety. And I miss that because you're not standing out at like, I go now old school, date myself, the delicatessen, like we don't even have those anymore. But you're not at like the luncheonette
Yeah.
somewhere on the corner. And as soon as you walk in online, I remember sitting there being a kid and watching my dad go get the paper, and you're in like a 20-minute conversation with some dude you don't know about the Mets or the Yankees. It's not like that anywhere else in the country. I miss that.
Right. I mean, even like from what I was remember watching, it's tough for Braves fans to get to the Braves games. They're not usually there. Uh, the Hawks fans, they're here and there. I feel bad for the Atlanta Thrashers fans. I know Joe supported the franchise, and they're out of town, so it's a different sports zone there. But at least near Atlanta over there, you have all the neighboring states that also support the Atlanta team. So it is very different. As of up here, where it's like if you're in New York or New Jersey, you support the New York teams, but other than that, there's other teams around.
Yeah, the biggest difference, honestly, in the sports stone, if you will, down here is so I grew up like 15 minutes from Hofstra, but this was not look, nobody cared where the alum was, unless you're trying to get into this business, and it was Syracuse, and for that reason, it wasn't like that. College football was a thing you watched on TV. You picked a team whose colors you liked, or you liked playing on NCAA football, or your cousin or brother went there. Like when you're growing up, there just was none of that. Here, I mean, there are kids 8 years old here that will know more than I do about college football. I've been watching a lot of it here, but it is so ingrained and it is so a big part of. I mean, there are more bars and places that are dedicated to college football than there are baseball, NFL, hockey, and basketball combined for college football alone.
Yeah,
That's the biggest
they
difference
love
for
the
me. It is
Georgia Bulldogs down there.
by far, college football is number one here compared to any professional sport.
It's crazy.
Amazing, the dichotomy between the two
Totally
regions.
different.
Amazing. So you graduated, you said you graduated BU,
I
go
went to BU.
Terriers.
Yep.
I know a lot of
Terriers.
people, a lot of guys that I grew up with went to Boston University. Know that rivalry really well in Commonwealth and BC. But you started your career doing something entirely different than you ended up doing. You started your career on Wall Street as an executive recruiter. Now, does that kind of entail headhunting a little bit? And
Yeah.
talk to us about what you went to college for and how you started out in that industry.
Yeah, so I went to college for broadcast journalism communications. And, long story short, one thing leads to another. I came home, finances, issues that were going on at home where I kind of needed to help out and go to work. So I got a job I went home, went back to community college to kind of finish out. And I went to, and went and worked for the S&P 500 for almost 3 years.
Wow.
So there I did and worked with research for bond ratings and selling kind of, where your company would get information out in the book and things of that nature. And it was ultimately an extremely boring job, especially for somebody who wants to do sports. And getting up and being on, the train and the 1 and 9 on the subway at 5 o'clock in the morning is not the most fun thing to be doing. The Long Island Railroad is. I used to think the DMV was the most unhappy place on
I
earth.
wouldn't wish the Long Island Railroad on my worst
It
enemy.
is. It is.
I have taken it back from the Hamptons to the Jamaica before. No, never again.
But seriously, it's one thing when you're taking it back, like, assuming you did it safely and you're intoxicated or like you're hungover or something, and you went like to the St. Patrick's Day parade. It's another thing if you're sitting there and you're like on your way to or from work with all the people who just didn't sleep and they're just so obnoxious with their briefcases and it was not a life I wanted to live. And I ended up doing some executive recruiting, and executive recruiting is basically headhunting. Yeah. So I did some of that. In between, I went and I moved to LA. And I went there in 2001, and I was down there for about 2.5 years. And I honestly was at a point where I wouldn't say kind of I was giving up, but I was making money doing different things. And I was working for a company that dealt with employee retention and using my skills with people instead of publicly in front of a microphone. And I really kind of hated myself for not going into it. So I started paying radio stations for airtime and basically making, I would use studio time up to make reels. And that's what I was doing. And then trying to get it out and having agents tell me that, they had no interest and, getting my head knocked against the wall constantly. So I moved back home to New York because I wanted to be closer to it. And I was an executive recruiter and headhunter while still trying to kind of push. I wrote for the Long Island Press. I was doing, little things that I could. I had 2 websites that I wrote for and blogs. And at the time that was a big deal because blogs were coming out where you try and kind of work your way in that way. And that's what I was doing when I got a call from my best friend's mother that there was an audition for this thing called Dream Job that was coming out. And it was the next day. I found out the day before. And that night I went to Monday Night Football, Giants Cowboys in a Dave Meggett jersey, which is before the statutory rape and all that stuff. It was okay then. And my two buddies who had found out about this audition, they didn't tell me, but after the game, they started driving back to Long Island. I was like, why are you going through the city? Like, you guys are idiots. And they basically just made this plan. They dropped me off on the side. It was in 7th Avenue outside ESPN zone at the time. I don't even know if that still exists there.
Does not
And yeah, I
say.
was there 7 hours before the doors open. I was the fifth person online, and they dropped me off on the corner and they said, we'll see you tomorrow night. You're not leaving until you go audition. So I went disheveled like a mess with no preparation after having a few too many beers during the Giants Cowboys. I had just a few hours to kind of get through the hangover and ask somebody to hold my spot. True story online, to just go 3 blocks away to find a place to pee before I got into audition. That's how my life changed. That's how I got into Dream Job.
So from fifth online to fifth place on the show,
Yep. Yep.
as you're going through the show, I mean, obviously,
Yep.
you probably felt like you were going to win, and I'm
Yes.
sure you were disappointed when you came in fifth. But looking back on it a little bit after, how happy were you with your performance on the show?
If I'm being honest, I kind of hated myself for a long time because
Okay.
I felt like it always sounds bad when you say things like this, but with all due respect to everybody else, I felt like I should have won. And I felt like my own, we had I still remember it. So we used to go into the studio and going through this process for weeks. We lived I lived on Long Island, so I wasn't far away, but a lot of people were from further out. So, we were sitting there and we were, put up in Manhattan, right across from Penn Station. And you're with these people intoxicating each other like with your space, like a million hours a day. And we always went to the studio very late in the afternoon, and we had gone out and had kind of a good time, and they decided to spur up a trivia contest on us as half of the week that I got eliminated. And it was like 9 o'clock in the morning, and I failed miserably. It's my own fault. I was mad. I was the only one who knew hockey or even liked hockey. They would admit it, the other contestants, and I missed the Vezina Trophy question, which is like Martin Brodeur, and I was like, I live in this area, and I hated myself. I'm a huge Islander fan, but I knew the answer. So I kind of was mad at myself because of the way that I lost. But at the end of the day, honestly, it was the best thing that ever happened to me because I don't think, you know, going in, Mike Hall, who won, and that's not an easy spot going into ESPN that way, where you're kind of dealing with everybody looking at you like you don't deserve this and having to kind of feel yourself out, work your way in. I had it totally differently. I ended up through Tony Kornheiser and a couple other people getting put in touch with an agent within a week. And actually, a month later, I had my audition and got a job at MLB.com where I spent 5 years. So I got really lucky because I got to go from the ground rules up. I mean, the first job I had was doing baseball highlights in America Online. It used to pop up, and it was like, to me, it was like a dream. I remember replaying the highlights over and over again. I couldn't believe like I was doing something related to sports. I'm glad I took that path. It made it better for me, I think. Yeah.
So let's talk about the agent because representation is incredibly important. Nick and I specifically asked this for people who are working in media and broadcasting, just because of the nature of opportunities and stuff like that. How important was that for you? And how important is it now having an agent? Is it something that you would personally recommend based on yourself and people that maybe you formed professional relationships and are close with? Do you think it's necessary? Do you think it's not necessary? What is your opinion on that?
I think it's a must. Yeah. I mean, I'm one of the people who actually thinks it's imperative. Unless you're, my last name is Stern, but David was not my father, or Howard. But if one of them were, then no, I wouldn't need an agent. Then I could be like, hey, Dad, get me an NBA job, or get me Howard on your show, and then all of a sudden, you're known and you're kind of in there. It doesn't work that way. I mean, I got lucky, and for me, it was even luckier than most people. I was on a reality show, right? So it was a little bit easier. People already see me on TV. My reel, so to speak, was already out there a little bit, enough to kind of get a sniff, and especially coming off of the rub, if you will, of being off of ESPN. But it is imperative. I mean, first of all, for what we do, it's weird because when you get like a real job, a lot of people do, and I've had to put resumes together after years in the broadcast industry, and like you're looking at it, it's like I don't even know what a resume even looks like. I was a headhunter, and I haven't seen a resume in 25 years. So if you don't have an agent that's able to have those conversations, and I think to me it's perception versus reality. You seem more important when somebody else is talking for you and kind of making those conversations. You know, most of the people in this business, and we all are, we're grinders and we're willing to knock on doors. And I've done some of that too, in some respects, in terms of making phone calls on my own if somebody wasn't interested or whatever the case is. But you want people to have those conversations for you. I'm not a contract lawyer. I don't want to be involved in negotiations. And if we've learned anything covering baseball as I have for 20 some odd years with arbitration, you do not want to be in a situation where you're in the room where they're telling you why they don't think that you deserve as much money. You'd rather have an agent that's in those conversations, buffering out, and I'm sure my agent hasn't told me everything, and no one's agent does. I think it's an imperative. To me, it's 10 out of 10 must have if you want to have a high level of success. I think you can get spots here or there, and podcasts have opened up a back door to not having an agent because then you can kind of give tape, if you will. But I think yeah.
That's a good answer. Good insights. So, MLB.com, and you also worked for
Yeah,
MSG Networks
I did.
earlier in your broadcasting career. So,
I
what
did.
was it like in that early stage, knowing that you finally were on the path that you ultimately always wanted to be on, pursuing a career in broadcasting?
It was honestly, it was kind of crazy because MLB.com was a lot of fun and I loved it. And I mean, I was there every day with the run with the Red Sox in 2004, and was on their website. I mean, in the World Series DB that's still today. When Poppy gets the trophy in the locker, I was the one interviewing for RedSox.com. So I was experiencing my dream. But when I got to MSG and I was there 06, '07, I was there for a little over 2 years, doing Knicks and Ranger pregame, and getting a chance to do the Knicks pre and post, and be involved with at the time we had our own kind of Sports Center show. And man, I mean, co-hosting. It was funny because I'm a diehard Islander fan, and I was co-hosting with Deb Placey pre Kaufman before that, and she had been doing Islander games for years. I'd never met her. Tina Servasio, who I still know, Jonathan Coachman, who some
Oh,
people might not realize got off the WWE, and
Yeah,
before ESPN was on MSG, was
it
next to me at
was.
a desk for a year. It was really, really cool. It was when I knew I made it, and then you try not to kind of rest on laurels, and I didn't, but it was just a really cool experience, and it definitely was hugely gratifying because it was a pinch me kind of a spot. Ironically, even having done Dream Job and being on ESPN and doing all of that, MSG was kind of the first time where I was like, holy expletive, like I'm really doing this because I'm a diehard Knicks fan. I grew up watching MSG my whole life. And here I am doing pre and post for the Knicks and doing the show at the desk, and that was just a really really cool time for me. Absolutely, I loved it.
yeah, I missed that show. I guess they
Yeah.
didn't think it was making them enough
Yeah, they
money,
got
and
rid
then
of they got rid of all that.
SNY took over the late night
They
show.
got rid of MSG, got rid of all that. Remember, they were
Yeah,
like when I was there, was when they were starting to go from like sports entertainment. They were trying to do, and they were like you're doing shows like the Fuse Network was doing shows out of there, and they were trying to do like
right.
all these different
Yeah.
things. And I mean, the reason I left MSG, they canceled the show. I mean, I was
Yeah.
there until the last day when they canceled it, and it was unfortunate. It was a lot of fun though. It was really cool. And the studio was right on Seventh Avenue, so it's like a Today Show kind of thing where like people are kind of walking right by. It was a fun couple of years. I enjoyed my time there.
Yeah. MSG now, you got the games.
Yeah,
That's it.
yeah. Brought to you by ChevyOffers.com. I
Yeah,
remember it.
always some sort of car
I
dealer.
remember it well. Remember it well.
So, Casey, after MSG, a little bit after, you got this huge opportunity to go national, taking your talents down south to Atlanta, Georgia, to work for Turner. So, how did that opportunity come about, and what was the audition process like?
Yeah, it was kind of crazy because so when MLB.com, I was at MSG and MLB.com at the same time. I did both. And within a month and a half, MSG canceled their basically their pre and post, so to speak, and we're going to do what they do with it was basically out trout wig, and there wasn't even the stuff that Pito was doing now. There was nothing, and they just kind of went to zero. And then MLB.com was really bought out in terms of all their video coverage because MLB Network came in. And I went and auditioned for MLB Network, and I made it all the way down to I was there with Victor Rojas, and there were a couple of others, and I didn't make it. I was one of the last cuts, and all of a sudden I was like without a job, and what in the hell am I going to do? And I ended up luckily, because I was covering winter meetings and out there anyway with MLB.com, the last winter meetings that I was out there after I had lost my job, they were like, you don't have to go. But it was in Vegas, and I was like, I'll go network. And when I was out there, I met folks from SiriusXM and I got the job there. And I started doing fill in work in December. And by spring, I had the afternoon drive. And it's because of that that I got the audition at Turner. So Turner, after Keith Oberman, had auditioned, I think they auditioned 10 people, and 9 of them were purely television. And some of them, because I saw them, were bigger names than me, way bigger names nationally than I was, because they were filling Oberman's spot. And there were people in there who knew of me and listened to my show and knew that I was a baseball guy from SiriusXM. So they actually called me. It's the thing that never happens in this industry, and it does not happen since, where an agent doesn't need to be involved. They actually contact my agent. They asked me to come in and audition, so which was crazy. So I flew down to Atlanta and I auditioned. It was just me and Sheffield during the audition. And I remember seeing him at the airport. I thought I did well. And I saw him at the airport afterwards. He was smoking a cigar on a bench outside Hartsfield Jackson. And he was like, bro, he's like, it's going to be you. And I won't name who the person is, but he said, man, there's a really good looking girl before you. And I was like, that's the one that I think is going to get the job. And then you went. He's like, I think it's going to be you. And I sat and I felt good, but I didn't hear anything for like, it felt like it might have been days. Honestly, it's so long ago, but it felt like weeks.
Yeah.
And then I got the call. I remember I was on a basketball court shooting hoops in Seaford, where I was living at the time. Just literally just like trying to do like a workout that sort of kept me not feeling fat. And I got a phone call from my agent that I'd gotten the job. And that was it. Then the rest was history. So I did one postseason where I kind of traveled back and forth. And once they wanted to start me doing NBA, and that went from fill in to me being the main host on NBA TV and eventually doing the finals. And I did NCAA for 3 years. As things were kind of expanding, that's why I moved down here. But the first year I traveled back and forth postseason.
So once you had to move, talk to us about, how your agent was able to work some magic to keep SiriusXM happy and Turner and kind of merge it all together and allow you to do everything.
Yeah, it was honestly, it wasn't as hard as it sounds, because of I have had other times in my career where I've had to turn down jobs or not take jobs that I really wanted that were kind of dream jobs of mine, including one that came out publicly that's the team that we talk about here, where it just didn't mesh with my schedule. I couldn't make it work, because it just would have been too much time away from TV for me to go do it and do both national and be kind of local. But because SiriusXM was such in a way, and radio in general was such in a way where I could do it anywhere. I mean,
Yeah.
I was doing radio from my house. So I worked at SiriusXM. I did the afternoon drive there for 12 years. And the first like year and a half, maybe I went to the studio. And the other 10 and a half years, I did it from a studio in my house. And it wasn't because I wouldn't have gone in the studio, but I didn't have to. I mean, I had a codec machine and I had everything that I needed. And because of that, I could do it whenever. I mean, I did radio shows at Turner where I would, do my SiriusXM show in the afternoon till 6. And then I would like just go change and go into the green room and get made up. And I'd be on air for like pregame on NBA TV at like 7. So, but
Crazy.
because it was so easy to do it remote, I got to kind of do it that way. It really wasn't that hard. The only times where SiriusXM was kind enough to kind of let it go was where I would do the postseason for baseball. Obviously, they wanted me to do my show. I did it for the World Series, but for 2 weeks I would be away. And then during the tournament, which is in March, spring training became a little bit wonky once I started doing the tournament. But they were really cool about it. To be honest, it was if the places you work for are not there's a lot of people in this industry. I mean, how Ryan Seacrest and Strahan and all these guys have all these jobs. I mean, everybody kind of, letting it massage a little bit to each other. You've got to have people who really want you enough to be that way. But I was grateful. SiriusXM was great about it, and I got very
So tell us some of your favorite co-hosts, whether
lucky.
it's on the
Oof.
radio side or analysts you worked with on the TV side.
Well, radio, I've worked with a lot of great people. I would say the most fun I had working was with Cliff Floyd. He and I were broadcast partners every day for about 2.5 years. And he's nuts and he's still a close friend. And the stories that I could tell but won't about living a month in a house with just me and him and our producer in spring training in
Wow.
Arizona in Scottsdale are just some of the most banana stories you literally ever going to hear. I mean, I'll give you a couple of quick nuggets that are just interesting. Is that he's the only guy I've ever met who will literally start watching like a show on Netflix in the middle of season 3, episode 4, just because like he just happened to see it pop on the screen. And I thought it happened more than one time where I thought he had watched the show. I'm like, hey, you like the show? Like, no, he just started, like just in the middle. And he also is more competitive at Madden than anybody I've ever seen, which
Oh,
is
Oh,
which is oh, like obnoxiously competitive. Like the kind of guy who, if he beat you at Street Fighter, would be sitting there and just mocking you, kind of a deal. So loves video games, but I love working with Cliff on TV. Man, I got so lucky. I mean, I got to sit there for years and watch Gary Sheffield and Pedro Martinez have conversations about the batter and hitter combo and those matchups and what they were like. And sitting there and watching, they set up a couch outside during at least 3 or 4 of the 7, 8 years I did it, where they had a big TV outside so that chef could smoke his cigars while he watched the games during the time that we weren't on TV. And I would only have to run in to do like those mid-inning breaks where Ernie now will kind of break in and tell you what's going on in the other game. But outside of that, basically just sitting there watching the games and sitting there and just soaking up his stories and hearing him. I remember specifically when Kershaw, if everybody remembers, in the 8th inning of the series against the Nationals, that the Nats ended up eventually winning the World Series. He comes in relief in a very tough spot, bases loaded, gets Adam Eaton out, who was red hot, lefty lefty. And I remember saying at the time we're sitting there watching it, like, you've got to now take him off the mound. I mean, this guy's much maligned for all the crap he gets for what he doesn't do. He got you the big out, but of course, and I love Doc, they were going to put him out there. And Jeff was literally, he said, and I can't remember if Soto then Rendon or the opposite, but he's like, one of the two, if not both, are going to hit home runs, and they hit back to back homers off him. Just because of a batter understanding the psyche of then that guy, that adrenaline dump that Kershaw was going to have, and now having to face the two best hitters. But those kind of things and learning those things were just, I mean, man, I mean, for sports fans like us,
yeah.
those are the most fun
that's
things I've done in my career. Those behind the scenes kind of things.
Right.
absolutely the
Me and
best.
Joey both worked at MLB Network for a while, so getting to
Yes.
meet some of the legends and
Oh yeah,
hear what they have to say during the games. You
oh, it's the
learn a lot.
best. It's the best. It's the best. That's just the fly on the wall stuff. That's just the best. I mean, I got to sit there for a few times a year and watch Shaq and Charles when you don't see them on the air during all those doubleheader nights and all those times. And when I filled in for Ernie and I was back up for 4 seasons, like that kind of stuff is like nobody can take that away from me. Like that, those are, as a kid, that pinched me to be able to do that kind of stuff for sure.
Right.
Okay.
You've covered a lot of sports. Is there one sport you'd like to potentially work on a game or so if you had the opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, hockey's, look, it's hard to say. Baseball's my favorite sport because it was my love as a kid, and I know it the most because of covering it. But the Islanders have been my favorite team since I'm like 4, and they always were. And I went to more Islander games when I lived in New York than I did Met games, and that was
Mm.
the case. Like once I had a car, like my high school years, college years, I probably went to twice as many. Like I was an Islander, like I mean, a nut job. I mean, of the 41 home games, I probably went to half of them every year and would sit up in the boonies, up against the wall in Nassau Coliseum. And, I remember getting all the student tickets every year in high school and all that. So, I got to do a little bit of pre and post when I was on MSG and get a snip of it, but it wasn't enough. Like it's something where it's not going to happen here in Atlanta, clearly, although they keep talking about bringing a team here. Someday, I'd love to do some hockey. And I would say I've had opportunities that I couldn't take because at the time I was in the heat of Turner, and it's just timing is everything, and I couldn't do it. It made no sense for me to do it. It would have been a downgrade career wise, but if those opportunities arose again, I would jump on them in a heartbeat. So because I love hockey, I'm obsessed with the value of being live for a hockey event. Like I just love the sport,
Nothing
so that
like
would
it.
be cool.
Are you interested in doing play by play? Because about 2 years ago, we had Brendan Burke on, And Burke is tremendous,
Fantastic.
tremendous on the Isles broadcast,
He's great.
tremendous on the national broadcast.
Yep.
Is play-by-play something that you would be interested in? And if it is, we have Sam Rosen retiring. I know we're Rangers fans. You're not, but there might be a vacancy and an opening. Would something like that really intrigue you and interest you? Would you be willing to jump on it if it?
Well,
Yeah,
yes, I would jump on it. Let's go backwards. The good thing is for our industry is that and it is the right way to do it. Most of the time, the guys who get those jobs are people who worked in the AHL or IHL, and they deserve their shot, and certainly far more than me. There have been times where guys have kind of jumped into play-by-play without experience. I think of Steve Berthium, who's actually really good at it. He's been doing it now years for the Diamondbacks.
Yeah.
When he jumped from the studio from ESPN, and I'm not saying anything against the team or the network that did that, and he's great, a terrific guy too. But in general, I'm more of the belief that they should give it to the people who kind of deserve that. Not that I wouldn't be willing to kind of moonlight. I did play by play when I was at Turner for the NBA. Once a week we had NBA TV games, and I did those. And I did U.S. Open tennis many years ago, actually, for CBS and USA. And I've done some baseball. I've done little things. I've never done hockey. It's definitely the hardest. I would love to do it. I've done it playing NHL hockey since like 1993, but I've never actually done it, but I would love to. It's something that I would like to do, but to be honest, and this is kind of, it may be different from a lot of people. Like my dream to get in this industry when I was a kid, when I was 5, I remember they asked, I actually during my interviews during the audition process of Dream Job, they ask you like a million questions. And I remember telling them the story, which is true, that my parents once had people over when I was a kid. I was like 5 years old. And they were walking people around the house, and the other people heard me talking to myself in the room. And my parents were like afraid to open the door because they were going to show them there's no one else in there. And I had a pencil, and I was pretending to be Bob Murphy. So when I was really, really young, I wanted to be play-by-play guy. As I got into my teens and my 20s, I wanted to talk. Like I loved sports talk. So play-by-play, I don't want to say it's not my thing. I would do it, but traveling around the country and the people who do it are amazing at it. I have too much to say. Like I enjoy the opining part. I enjoy digging into a story. I enjoy telling a story. And to be great at play-by-play, like Vin Scully, who to me is the greatest of all time, or you think of Doc Emmerich. I mean, these are wordsmiths for sure. But Vin knew how to make the game breathe and allow that space, 3-2 count, 2 down, and just allow the crowd to play. The less talking, the better. I mean, the ones that are great at it. I mean, look, I love Butch. I'm a diehard Islander fan. But one of the things that makes Brendan great is he allows and makes Butch shine. And I don't think people understand enough that Butch is nuts. Like, there are a lot of guys who would talk too much or talk over him or not allow that space, it's why Ernie Johnson, EJ, is so great, because how does Charles get to that level where he could beat Charles, where you've got a host who's not egotistical, who's allowing that to happen? So I don't want to say I have too much ego, but I talk too much and probably would want to be more of the guy who's bringing the story than just teeing up.
All right, so you're a better podcast host.
Yes.
So
better talk
let's
show. Sure.
let's talk about the Bleav stuff, right? Because
Yep.
once upon a time, my podcast co-host over here actually hosted the Mets show for the
Yep.
Bleav Network, right?
Yep.
So let's talk about hosting the show and being a part of the Bleav and what they're doing over there right now.
Yeah, I was in a spot where I ended up, long story short, different things happened. It is what it is. But for family reasons, ended up kind of, being outside of, my career at a time where it was at its height, and which was, unfortunate, but it is what it is. And then being in a spot where I'm trying to kind of rebuild it, and you're trying to find the right opportunities. And, I think the thing about podcasting in general is it allows you to really kind of make your own space and, create like you guys are doing here, and be able to make your own impact and do it your way. And, that's kind of the fun part of it. I'd be lying if I didn't say it's a means to an end for me. I mean, it's something where, I'd like to have, and I think I will someday, my own radio show again, and like to get back into television. So it's a way to kind of stay relevant, and to me, to keep those muscles going, because in some ways it's like riding a bike. So, I hadn't hosted on radio in a while. And I went on, shoot, maybe like I've been doing shifts now for about 3, 4 weeks. The first time I went in, it was like I felt it. Like I felt the nerves of not having done it and been in a studio in so long. And I mean, I did Monday through Friday for 12 years. So there were times where, not to sound terrible, but I could have played NHL 93 while hosting and you would have had no idea. Like you're just doing it every day. Like, you know what I mean? It's just nothing. It just becomes something you're so used to. And to be able to kind of work those muscles out and be able to stay relevant and keep my name in the know while they're in the background, being a dad with kids and all that other kind of stuff, it allows you to kind of, make your own schedule that way. So it's been beneficial. And, really look, and it's, Bleav has been great to me. But at the end of the day, the podcast is your voice, it's your show. And whatever you do it through, they're a conduit for you to get that out there. So, you just want a place that allows you to do it your way. And that's all you can ask.
So for you, what's the biggest differences between hosting and preparing for television versus radio versus digital?
Man, I mean, digital is by far, it's by far the easiest because you don't have a lot of the variables that the other two do. I mean, you've got things to pay off, and you might be reading a sponsor here and there, but comparatively, it's nothing in terms of hard outs and running times and interviews and benchmarks and co-hosts and all of that other kind of stuff that you deal with. Radio is far harder than television in most ways. I've always said that I think working on radio made me better at television because one of the things in working in TV that you notice is that a lot of people have a really hard time when it's not structured because they're so even hosts it's so used to where I'm not naming it, a lot of them. What if the prompter goes down? Well, in radio there's no prompter. I don't have a prompter. So, in TV, to be honest, I rarely used one. I used one for ads, like when you'd hear reads, because I don't know what exactly the verbiage is. But I didn't write at MSG. I wrote leads and outs. Turner, honestly, maybe a handful of times during the NCAA tournament because a lot of it's very specific in terms of the packages and features that we're running. And you're on air so long, sometimes they're inputting it in the back and you don't even know what you're throwing to until like a minute before. But outside of that, I didn't really like to use a prompter. I like being able to go off the cuff because it makes you prepare more. So radio is way harder. The part where TV becomes difficult from a hosting standpoint is the total running times. I mean, it is amazing how short these segments are. I mean, you work in blocks. You guys know. I mean, you sit there. It's like a block is 14 minutes, and between the sots and all the different things you're throwing to, you really each little spot maybe 37 seconds. So your total running time to tee up your analyst is like 9 seconds
Yeah.
to give them as much as you can. So that stuff's way harder. And when you're going from like talk show, that was probably one of the harder parts because I'd be like talk show host all day. And then at night, I'm sitting there with two NBA players at a desk. And, the good news is I was tired physically and mentally by doing 4 hours every day. So I didn't want to talk as much because it's totally different. And the job is totally different. But I think overall, people should have huge respect for folks who do radio because it's harder in play-by-play to describe the story. And I think it's harder from a talk show standpoint because really it is you and it's only you. And that dead space and that dead air, they're not looking at pretty B-roll, to use the term, for people who don't know what the three of us know. If you're looking at video of Pete Alonso hitting home runs and I sit there and I hit a cough button and blow my nose and nobody knows, you're not knowing anything. I mean, it doesn't even cross your mind. But on radio, that 2.5, 3 seconds could seem like an hour. So radio is 100 times harder, I think, in my opinion.
Absolutely. So for Nick, I think if I could construct the opportunity that he would want the most right now, it would probably be being on the Mets broadcast team, right? The great SNY, or maybe he would probably settle for like a Steve Gelbs type of role, right? Somebody who's kind of just on air doing interviews and stuff like that. But for you personally, considering that you've done radio, you've been on TV, you've worked for a bunch of different sports, and you've had the opportunity to work with a couple of amazing people, what would you consider an ideal opportunity right now that if somebody presented to you, you would jump on it?
Yeah, for me, it's a little bit specific because I that opportunity being in Atlanta is important to me from a family standpoint, and it's part of why. Yeah. I mean, I'm not sitting here. Very grateful for where I'm at and what I've done in my career. But if for not being so tied to Atlanta, I would be. I've had opportunities in New York and Boston and some other things that I haven't been able to take. I can remote travel, but it's harder for me right now to move permanently. So something in Atlanta. Look, I'm at the point where I just want to be happy and make an impact and enjoy what I do. It's not as big a deal. I got to a point I never thought I'd get to before. And I remember it's funny we're talking about college football. Like, look, I grew up a St. John's fan, and my grandfather went to St. John's. I grew up in Long Island. Walter Berry, Mark Jackson, Chris Mullen. Like, that was my team in the '80s growing up. And doing the NCAA tournament, like when I started doing that, even though I was done all this baseball stuff, that was like my holy expletive moment because I know how many people watch the tournament. And I know because when I said Nevada instead of Nevada, I heard from all of them. So I know how much that's watched. Like I already reached kind of that kind of side of it where like I need to get to that point for me. I just want to be happy. So, doing local radio here, I'd love to get involved in some TV down here, even if it's local. Like the stuff that was important to me in the Wayback Machine is not as much anymore. Like I just want to enjoy the business and create something. So whatever that ends up being, but yeah, I mean, look, Mets and Islanders. I've had some very close calls in the past that I just couldn't do because they weren't the right time. But the Islanders someday, somehow, in some way, is something that's got to happen before I go because that was my team growing up, and even more so than the Mets. And I'm a diehard Met fan. But the fact that I haven't done any hockey, like someday at some point in some way, that's I look and I hope Brendan and Shannon say they're forever. But if forever isn't forever, at some point that would be a dream. Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see. I mean, like what Joe said, there's going to be a lot of shuffling at MSG Networks coming soon with Sam Rosen
Yeah.
retiring. So we'll see. Maybe Brandon Burke gets moved over to the Rangers, and I think begrudgingly he'd have to accept that move over.
Yes.
He's an Islanders fan.
Yes.
So that's what I did with
Yes.
Joe Micheletti. So he moved over from Islanders to Rangers. So you never know. But Casey, in your career, what would you say has been your you know I'm right moment? What I mean by that, it's a time or place where you wanted to pursue something, you asked somebody for advice. They said, Casey, like, that's not gonna work out. What are you crazy? Why would you try that? And you were like, you know what? I'm gonna do it anyway. In the end, you will see why it is that I'm right about this, and I can tell you I told you so.
Um. Oh man, that's a very good question. I would say I feel like I'm on the Pivot, which is a podcast that I listen to, and I love when they ask. And I'm always thinking, like, what if they ask me that? Okay, this is like okay. Um. Man, and I got to be egotistical and say that I was right. I'd say just betting on myself in general.
Hmm.
Um, to be honest with you, there wasn't a single solitary soul that believed when I said when I went to Dream Job that I could be a broadcaster, that I could be a broadcaster. Yeah, I'd gone to school for it, but I hadn't worked in it in at all professionally, and outside of like writing for the Long Island Press, and yeah, even my own parents, while they love me great, I don't. Nobody really took it seriously, and I knew that I had a chance to win the whole effing thing. I just knew it. And there were 10,000 people. And to be honest, I still think I should have, not based on what I did, how I performed, but that's just like I had confidence in myself. Like I just knew, and I would say the one piece of advice that I would give, which kind of ties along to this, is that I remember I worked with a lot of great people. Buck Martinez, who is a friend, he's one of the nicest guys literally you'll ever meet in your life. And I got to work with him a bunch at SiriusXM. And I remember doing a World Series that the Yankees were playing the Phillies, and we were doing pre and post. And he had never met me before we had done that together. And he told me, which was I'll never forget, he said that if I continue to prepare the way he's watched me prepare, that I would have a chance to be great because he said that my prep was to a level, and he'd been in the business a long time, that was equal or better than what he was used to at the people at the highest level. You'll have a chance to tell people that they're right if you work hard, because in this business it's all about preparing. I was an over preparer. I was not somebody who like scheduled every 4 minutes of radio. I'd take a tangent for an hour, but I was ready to do like 3 days worth of radio in every 4 hour show that I did 2 to 6 every day. And that's the way I always tell people and younger people that you have to prepare. You have to, because when you have the knowledge, that's where the instincts come from. Those reflexes to be able to go anywhere when you're on the air, they come from knowledge. And it's not just knowing like trivia. Like, I mean, look, I worked with Russo at SiriusXM, and I've never, even when I'm his age, there's no way I'm going to recite half the crap, stay PG rated, that he recites. Like, there's no way.
Mhm.
But the more you read, the more you talk to people, and the more you pay attention to what's going on and absorb, that prep is everything. And that's where you'll get to say things like that. So because I worked hard, I got to do things. I mean, look, SiriusXM, Turner, they gave me one shift in NBA. They were like, "We'll let you try it out." And I had no NBA experience. And then a year later, I was the main host on NBA TV. Like, it's just hard work. It's not, I'm certainly no taller than anybody else, and I'm not necessarily more gifted. It just put the work in, like anything else.
Very
It's a
nice.
grind. Good old-fashioned hard
Yes,
work. That's what we like to
absolutely.
do.
Yes.
So, Casey, we appreciate your time. Thank you for joining
Yeah, of
us.
course.
We wish you the best of luck moving
Thank
forward.
you.
We always give our guests here the last words. So if there's anything else you would like to share outside of what you already said, by all means, go ahead. Promote yourself. Where can we find you? And once again, thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, of course. Anytime, guys. You follow me on Twitter, X at Casey Stern, Unfiltered with Casey Stern on Instagram as well. You could Facebook friend me. You could do that too if you want. I don't use TikTok, so I did not cry when it was down for 6 hours and 12 minutes or whatever the hell it was. And I would just say, like, for people who are trying to get into broadcasting, like, honestly, like, never give up. Like, I've seen so many stories of people who have gone from callers to being longtime hosts, and people who have, that's the great thing about the podcast business. Just get a webcam, start talking, start practicing. Who cares if 3 people watch? Don't follow numbers, and just keep pushing, because if I could do it, you could do it. I mean, I was anybody can do this. It's just you if you have the gift for sports and you're at a sports bar and you're that guy that everybody's sitting there debating with, you're halfway there. Just get some practice and polish up. But I would just say believe in yourself.
Very well said. And you got to believe in the Mets. That's going to do it here for this episode of You Know I'm Right for our very special guest, Casey Stern, for my co-host, Joe Calabrese. I'm Nick Durst, and this has been You Know I'm Right.